It's a web automation framework written in Python that allows you to easily automate websites. I can't run all the examples right now because I can't do a full screen share of the entire screen, but I do have a lot of GIFs within the web pages itself that allow you to see what the test is actually doing when it runs. So there are several features with SeleniumBase where you can easily write a script and then run it. You can easily install it with Python from PyPy. So you can do pip install SeleniumBase, and that will get you set up. You can also install from a GitHub clone by just cloning it, installing the requirements.txt file, and running setup.py install. Let's see. And one of the things that you'll need is a driver. So different browsers, for instance, Chrome, you'll need Chrome driver. SeleniumBase has a command that automatically takes care of that for you so that you can easily just run that and it'll install the necessary drivers as you go. To run a test on Chrome, it's pretty easy. It's just go into the examples folder and then pytest myfirsttest.py. And if you're running in a mode called demo mode, it will automatically show you what it's asserting as it's checking it. So let's go into myfirsttest.py so you can see what that looks like. So here's a basic test. You just need to import base case from SeleniumBase. So from SeleniumBase import base case. Then you have you set up the class. So I called it myTest class, and then you inherit base case. And then you create your method definition, and then you can run basic commands such as opening a web page, typing in text into a text field, asserting text on a page, or within a specific selector. You can also assert, say, the title or an element on the web page. You can click any element button all that easily just by using the CSS selector. Or you can also use XPath. You can click with link text, assert link text, and all that. Let's see. So by default, CSS selectors are used to identify page elements. You can also use all the other elements that come with regular Selenium WebDriver, such as link text, partial link text, name, class name, and ID. But most of these can be expressed as a CSS selector, so you're probably better off using that. And here's an example of changing the by from, say, the click method, where you click next and I want to click by partial link text. That's easy to do. And XPath is used by default if the argument starts with slash, dot slash, or open parenthesis. So as you can see here, I didn't have to change anything at all. If you're completely new to CSS selectors, you can right-click and inspect something in order to see what the CSS selector for that is. So you'll basically be able to see, like, okay, I want to click on a link here, and then I right-click inspect, and I find all the CSS selectors there, and I can just copy the selector if you're not familiar with that. Let's see. You can also have the optional timeout argument for most methods. So if, let's say, you need to wait a bit for your element to load, you can add that in pretty easily. Selenium-based methods perform multiple actions. So for instance, the type selector text method will wait for the element to be visible, wait for the element to be interactive, clear the text field, type in the new text, and press enter submit if the text ends in \n, which saves you a lot of complexity that regular WebDriver and other test frameworks often make you do. And you might find some duplicate method names for methods that do the exact same thing. That was to make it easier to adapt when coming from other test frameworks. So there's a lot of ways to do the same thing. So the whole assert text method, where you have the text and a CSS selector, that's the same as just text equals self.getText of that, and then self.assert true that inside the text, which is the same as elements equals self.findElement, text equals element.text, and self.assert true, that text is inside the text. So there's a lot of ways to write these tests that can basically check to make sure that all your website pages are working correctly. And that, let me go through some of the features that Selenium-Based can do, since I'm not live demoing them, but I can go through them. So let's see, there is also a YouTube video of what I was going to do had this full screen share been working. So to get to that, you can just go to the Selenium-Based help docs features list, and you'll get the whole YouTube tutorial on basically doing the record and playback to auto-generate a test, to do test multi-threading, to instantly convert CSS selectors into page objects, and running in demo mode and all sorts of various modes within Selenium-Based. So you've got the complete test framework for web and mobile UI testing, and to turn any regular test into a mobile test, you can add -- mobile when you run it with pytest, and it will automatically run it using the mobile device emulator that Chrome provides. You can run the test with pytest, but you can also run it with nose as well if you're still using that, but almost no one is using nose anymore, so pytest is the tool to use, the test runner to use. There are no more flaky tests because each Selenium-based method does smart weighting to make sure that each element that you want to interact with has fully loaded and is interactable before clicking on it. So let's say you want to update a text field, Selenium-based will make sure you can fully interact with that before continuing on. And that sort of thing leads to flaky tests when other test frameworks try to do a rapid click, but a certain page element hasn't loaded yet. You also have the ability to translate Selenium-based into multiple spoken languages. So if we go into that section for a bit, every Selenium-based method has been translated into 10 different languages. So for instance, with Chinese, instead of like importing base case, you'll use from seleniumbase.translate.chinese import that. I can't really read Chinese, so I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce that, but essentially this allows you to have teams all across the world being able to use Selenium-based, and then they'll be able to write tests in their natural language. So for instance, here we have the Russian test. So you can see like this is to open a URL, and you can also assert that an element is appearing on the page, all in that language. So it's quite a powerful feature if English is not your preferred language. There are also lots of console scripts that can help you do things more easily, such as set up a test directory with example tests already inside, or as you saw earlier, install a WebDriver automatically. So there's the Selenium-based mkdir command, which will give you the setup folder with a pytest ini file that basically does some basic configuration for you so that you don't have to do all that setup on your own. Or you can use mkfile to create a basic boilerplate. You can also use the Selenium-based convert method to convert a regular WebDriver unit test file into Selenium-based. And if I ever get the full screen share ability later, I think Evan might be working on trying to get that working. I'll be able to show you how all these work specifically. And with the Selenium-based translate command, you'll be able to take any test in any language and instantly translate it to a different language. And that works because every Selenium-based method has a one-to-one mapping with all the other supported languages, which means that if you've got one language working, you can just use Selenium-based translate that Python file into the language, and you've got one of 3 different actions, such as just print to display it, or you can also overwrite the file or copy a new file out of that. So next, let's see, instant page objects generation. That's harder to explain unless I show you how that works, so we'll come back to that later. You can download the Selenium server if you want to create your own Selenium grid running, and there's a command, Selenium-Base grid hub start, or Essbase is a simplified version of Selenium-Base, both work. And you can instantly start a grid hub and a grid node that attaches to that grid hub, which will allow you to run tests against like multiple machines for each one that has the Selenium grid and hub. All right, let's see, let's go back. You can run tests multi-threaded in parallel using the regular pytest-n num threads, which is very convenient if you want to, say, run 4 tests at the same time. There are plugins that automatically handle logging the data and the screenshots. So for instance, if we go here, if you run a test and it fails, it's going to automatically generate 3 files for you: a basic test info.txt, a page source.html file, and a screenshot.png. And basically, you can also, actually, I'll just go into these files so you can see what they look like. So here's an example, basic test info, which shows you the last page it was on when the test failed, the browser you're using, the epic timestamp so you know exactly what went when the test failed, and the traceback so that you know exactly what went wrong. So this makes it very convenient. And all of this data is sent into the pytest HTML report, which Selenium-Base attaches screenshots to. So let's say you run a test suite using the --HTML equals report.html plugin. You will get a report that looks like this, where you can see, say, the test that passed at the bottom, but more importantly, at the top, by default, will be the test that failed, the stack traces that were there, the screenshot associated with the failing tests, and that will help you easily debug issues that may have gone wrong. All right, so next, let's see, going back to here. All right, so there's also nose test reports, but by default, well, most people are using pytest, so you shouldn't have to worry about nose test reports. Let's see, so it's backwards compatible with WebDriver, which means that you can use any WebDriver method with Selenium-Base by using self.driver. There's also a tool for creating website tours. So this is a special feature where essentially you can create a website tour on any website in the world, even if you don't own that website. And the way that works is you can create a pop-up that basically gives you directions and guides you to how to use the tool. So for instance, welcome to Google Maps. There's a search box. Click here to get driving directions. Click here to switch to satellite view and all that. This is basically a powerful feature where you can use Selenium-Base to auto-generate JavaScript for you so that you can do far more than just testing, such as building out website tours. All right, so if you want to see what the example code for that looks like, we go into, say, the Maps Intro.js tour. Once we've waited for the page to fully load, you can create a tour and set a theme, and then you can add a tour step where it displays a message and an optional title. And you also have the ability to set the optional CSS selector that you can attach that tour step to. So if you want it to say, okay, here's a search box, you can have that message go directly to that. So pretty much with using add tour step, you can add all the steps to your tour and then even export the tour as a JavaScript file or play it right there in the browser. All right, let's go on to another feature. You can use headless mode to run your tests on a machine where there's no like actual display, such as when you have continuous integration. You can just set the -- headless option and all your tests will run with that. You can also run tests through a proxy server by just using -- proxy equals IP address : port. Or if it's an authenticated proxy server, you can do -- proxy equals user : pass at IP address : port. You can also change the web browser's user agent string by using -- agent user agent string. And that's actually very useful when you're running tests with Selenium-based mobile mode, because now you can simulate various devices, such as like, okay, I want an iPhone simulated, or I want an Android device simulated. By changing these three things, the user agent and the user device metrics, it's in another section, you can then set exactly what device you're testing on. And you can easily test Chrome extensions or just use that with your tests. So for instance, if there's an important Chrome extension that you need when running your tests, you can easily add that in when running with Selenium-Base. You can handle Google Authenticator logins with Python's one-time password library, which will basically, in combination of a timestamp and the QR code that was given to you when you set that up, you can have it use that for authentication. There's also an automated manual solution called Master QA, which combines manual automation with regular automation. So for instance, you'll see there's a manual check that between various steps in a test, so that automation can do tedious actions such as logging into a website, clicking some buttons, and then the manual tester, if need be, can then approve whether or not that screen is actually what they want. So one of the cool things about Selenium-Base is that it has the JavaScript Injector that allows you to take any JavaScript library and inject it directly into any website you want, which is quite convenient if you want to be able to just do web development and with Python and make things easier for that. The entire code for that was pretty much here. You open a web page, you do verify with a default message, do you see a webcomic, and then you can go to a different page and all that. It's really easy to use, and you get a report generated with screenshots at the end of that. All right, let's go on to the next feature, which is continuous integration. So if we go to the top Selenium-Based folder, you'll see that there is a check mark up here, which shows you all the continuous integration tests that are running against the build. So for instance, if you ever needed to, if you have an open source project that needs web automation, you can use, for instance, GitHub Actions, which will run all the automation for you using Selenium-Base. And a simple build is fairly straightforward. It'll set up the version of Python you want. It'll install your Python dependencies. It'll install Selenium-Base. It'll check that all your code is good with Flake 8. It will install Chrome and Firefox. It'll install Chrome driver and Gecko driver. It'll check that pytest is working. And then you can run, it'll run a bunch of example tests just to make sure all the tests are running. And then if everything passes, that's then great. So that's an example of GitHub Actions to run Selenium-based tests. Let's see, additionally, there's a new feature that just came out today called Presenter. And Presenter essentially allows you to use Selenium-Base to create a web presentation. Let's see if I can actually get the URL to run that. One sec. I have to go into the output. I'm on a different screen. So essentially with Selenium-based presentations, you can insert HTML and create a animated JavaScript presentation out of that very easily. Let's see if we go to, one sec, I am finding a presentation that I can open. Okay, here we go. I'm going to put that into the window. So as you can see here, if you can see the window, welcome to the presentation. You can just click through, add HTML to any slide. In an example here, you have an HTML table. You can also display code. You can highlight code. You can add notes to the slides. You can add images to slides. And you can even add an iframe to the slides. So what you see here, this is not an image, this is an iframe within the presentation. So if you're wondering how the code for that, I have an example in the examples presenter folder. Let's see, here we go, mypresentation.py. That is the entire code for Selenium-Based presenter, which allows you to instantly create an HTML presentation using pure Python with some HTML. So for instance, with the first slide, you need to first create the presentation, then add slide, and you can add raw HTML. You can also, like here, inserting an image. Let's see, insert any type of HTML into a slide like a table. You can also display code by doing code equals, and you put your code in there and it'll automatically do syntax highlighting for that. So if we go back to that slide, this is what the result of that is. You paste the code and then it gets automatically syntax formatted. And you can also highlight code by adding a dash or the mark to the code that you want to highlight. So on the next slide, you'll see that's highlighted. Next thing you can do is add notes to a slide like this, like note A, note B, note C. And that would appear on this slide here. And you can also add an image to a slide by just attaching the URL. So image equals the URL. And that would be on this slide here. So to create a slide with an image. And if you want to attach like a whole website into a slide, you can use the iframe option where you specify the URL you want and you put that in the iframe, and it'll automatically take that page and put it within an iframe on your presentation so that you can demo something. So this feature of Selenium-Based was actually just finished today, and I added into Selenium-Based 1.41.0, which essentially with a few lines of Python, you can generate an animated JavaScript presentation that is very slick. So let's go back into testing, since the main thing of Selenium-Based is like testing any website reliably. But after that, I soon decided that, hey, I can use this tool to not just help with test automation, but I can use it to say, build website tours or build presentations and all that. All right, so let's go into some of the more powerful features within Selenium-Based, such as automated visual testing. Let's go back up to that. So visual tests. So automated visual testing helps you detect when the layout of a web page has changed. And instead of comparing screenshot differences, it'll actually compare HTML tags to know whether or not a web page might have changed, and possibly in a not great way, or perhaps it was just normal website updating and stuff. So this is, if you might have heard of a company called Applitools, they basically created a not free version of what this does. And I decided that, hey, this automated visual testing thing should be free. So I essentially created a free version of that. And it gets the same results. So if you're running a test, let's see if I have and you can see that at the end, you'll get a pytest HTML report. I don't know if you can see this because the font is kind of small, but you'll see how the website changed. Let me zoom in. Oh, this is not helping because it's blurry, but essentially you'll see this was the previous version of the website, the line that changed, and here is the new version. There'll be a minus and a plus, and you'll be able to see what the earlier version of the website was compared to the new version, so that if there's a visual change, you'll be able to detect that, such as the donate button on the python.org website. That was removed, which Selenium-Based has tools to add and remove components from a website you're testing. You'll be able to make that comparison and find those differences. And I would have loved to demo this whole feature for you, but right now I'm just going through the documentation. But if you want to see a full video on that, there is a YouTube tutorial specifically on automated visual regression testing with SeleniumBase. All right, so let's see. The next thing you might be interested in is, let's go into the examples section because that is quite useful. So inside the Selenium-Based examples folder, there are lots of tests that you can just start running, and you can see how Selenium-Based works with them. So for instance, running my first test with demo mode, you can see all the page objects that the Selenium-Based is checking for within the test, and it will highlight it and give you a box saying, hey, I'm asserting that this element is here. You can also run a full test on a different website, for instance, the Swag Labs website, which basically simulates the entire shopping experience. So from here, you can see items being added to a cart, going to the checkout page, putting in your details, your login info, and then checking that the item appeared in the cart and that your checkout was complete. There's a full test for that too, in case you're doing a web automation on e-commerce sites. Headless for running headlessly on a headless machine such as Linux, although it is the default mode on Linux, so you won't have to worry about adding that in there. Here's an example of Selenium-Based mobile mode, which essentially uses the mobile device emulator to run the same test that you saw earlier, but now it's running it on a Android Pixel 3 device. You'll see that the website looks a little differently, but it's using the exact same tests that it used before up here, except all I added was -- mobile, and it automatically kicks in the mobile device emulator to do everything, which is very useful. Here's an example that has basically most of the web components that you'll see in common websites. That test is called test demo site. It has different types of text fields, like an input field, a text box, buttons that you can click on. Let's see, an HTML SVG input slider, a progress bar, an HTML meter, radio buttons, checkboxes, even iframes with an image in an iframe, text in an iframe, and a checkbox in an iframe. So one of the things that many test automation frameworks have a lot of problems with is interacting with elements within an iframe. That's really easy with Selenium-Based because it's one line of code to switch into the iframe. All right, running tests multi-threaded is very easy. You just do pytest, test suite, and then -n equals 4. And the -v just gives you a slightly more complex display, so you can see the full test name, the class name, and method name and file name. You can run a parametrized test really easily with this example here, which is a very useful feature. I'm going to show you what that looks like here. Here we go. So a parameterized test allows you to take the same test, but run it in with multiple different inputs, and it'll create a brand new test out of each input. So for the case of running this particular test parameterized Google search, it's going to generate 3 tests out of this one test when it runs with pytest. And you'll be able to see, okay, here's the first string and the second string. So essentially, it'll go into Google, it'll type the first input into the field and search for it, and then it'll assert that the second part appears in the results. So here's an example of just parameterizing tests. So you can take any test and then have it run with multiple different inputs without having to actually change anything. And you'll also notice that the command line itself is very powerful because on the command line, you can say whether or not you want to run multi-threaded tests or run it using a mobile device emulator or demo mode or various other options that are available. let's see. Let's go check out the next useful page, which is the command line options page. So if you go to Selenium-Based website, you should be able to find a link, CMD options. And from there, you'll be able to see all the various things that you can do, such as changing which browser you're using, such as Chrome, which is default, now running a test in Firefox, or running the test in Safari or IE. You can change the browser on the command line without ever having to modify the test itself, which is an extremely useful feature so that you don't have to ever change your test at all. You can just change your command options on the command line. Here's again the example for running a test suite multi-threaded with 4 different threads. Here's an example of creating the HTML report, which gives you the stack traces and screenshots of failing tests. Here's a command line option where you can instantly tell a test that you're running to stop and enter debug mode if it fails. Here's another case where you can have a test rerun if it fails, and then it'll run the test that many times until it passes. You can also pass extra data into the tests, such as with this option, --data equals, and then for instance, I just pass the string ABCDEF, and that is accessible in the test by using self.data within the test. And now you can access any additional data you want to pass into your tests. The next thing you see is running tests on a local Selenium grid. So that's easy by just specifying the IP address of the server. And you may want to use a remote Selenium grid, which most of them use port 4444. Or if there's authentication, you can use, say, username : key at IP address : port. And in case that you're using like Sauce Labs, Browser Stack, or one of the others, this would be how you connect to that. You can also tell your tests to reuse the same browser session if you use --reuse -session, which essentially, instead of like having a web browser spin up and spin down for each test, it'll just spin it up once at the very beginning of the test suite, and then as a test finishes and moves on to the next test, it'll just use that same browser window for all future tests. Let's see, you can change the user agent string as you saw before, change mobile device metrics, add a custom settings file, and inside the custom settings file, there are default timeouts set, such as how long to wait when you're trying to click an element, but the element hasn't fully appeared yet. By default, I think the default timeout is like 6 or 10 seconds. So if you do like self.click or self.type, it'll wait up to that many seconds for the element to become visible and interactive before failing and saying, hey, this element never appeared, move on to the next test. Let's see, lots of different other command line options that you might find useful, such as collect only, which will display all the tests that you would have run if you had run them, but it won't actually run them. Let's see, you can run all tests that have a specific pytest marker attached to them. Let's see, you can also provide a lot of other command options to tests, such as passing in additional variables, setting the test environment, setting a desired capabilities file, which is more advanced, and you might not need it unless you're connecting to, say, a Sauce or Browser Stack Selenium grid. Running with an extension, zip file, or directory, running in mobile mode, user device metrics, changing the port, setting a time limit so that if a test runs beyond a certain time limit, it will fail automatically. Let's see, setting the message duration. Let's see, running tests on a remote Selenium grid. So for instance, here's the example of connecting to Browser Stack. Here's the example of connecting to the Sauce Labs Selenium grid. And there are others like Testing Bot and cross-browser testing. And by default, if a test fails, you'll be able to find all the results from the latest test run in the latest logs folder. So if I run, say, test fail, or test suite, which has failing tests in it, you should be able to see a latest logs folder in the directory where you ran pytest, and you'll be able to see like the screenshots, the basic test info, and the HTML of the last page you were on when the test failed. And of course, there's demo mode, which will automatically highlight and print a message at what is being asserted as a test runs. And you can completely configure that by setting, say, the sleep time of like a message and other related parts like that. Let's see, retrying failing tests, we covered that. Multi-threaded tests, we covered that. Passing additional data into tests, we covered that. All right, if you're trying to debug tests, there are multiple ways of doing that. For one, you might want to just put a sleep statement just for yourself, just to see like, okay, this is what the page looks like before continuing, but then delete that before you actually like submit your test into CI. You can also just put in a breakpoint with import ipdb.setTrace, which will enter debugging mode as soon as your test reaches that specific line, which is very useful if you want to see what's going on. PyTest reports, as we went over before, using the --HTML equals report.html plugin, you can instantly generate a PyTest report after your test after your test completes, which shows failing tests, their stack traces and screenshots. And if there's no failure, you'll just see it passed at the bottom of the test. Nose test reports, we're not going to worry about that. Proxy server, so if you need to use a proxy server, that's really easy to do. And that's just a command line option again. We covered that. Okay, so that pretty much covers all the command line options that you may run into. Let's go into some continuous integration examples that may help you when you're trying to set up, say, Selenium-Based for running in a CI instance. So for instance, GitHub has GitHub Actions workflows, where you can easily set that up for your tests if it's an open source project, and you can easily install your dependencies, run your browsers, and check that all the tests are working. We give you a quick start here to show you how to get started with that. If you just fork SeleniumBase and then go to GitHub Actions and click to set up this workflow, it'll generate a YML file for you, which you can then update easily with the Selenium-Base included one, which allows you to get started quickly because it shows you, okay, here's how we install Chrome driver and Gecko driver. Here's how we install Google Chrome or Firefox. Here's how we run that particular test. Once you've created that, you can just commit the file, and GitHub Actions will then automatically start running it if you specify that, say, every time there's a change to, say, master branch, it will run your GitHub Actions and alert and notify you if there's a failure. So yeah, you'll be able to do that for like any Python version that you want. You can just specify that in the YML file. If you still say support Python 2.7, but most of the time you'll be more interested in like say 3.8 and 3.7, the newer versions of Python. We also have a similar tutorial for getting set up on Google Cloud. And this is actually the cheapest option if you're dealing with something that's not an open source project, because with the $13.61 a month, you can pretty much set up an entire Jenkins instance on Google Cloud, because this is ridiculously much less expensive than all the options you'll find online. What's this going on? Oh, weird pop-up. But anyway, it's because I'm logged in, it's showing an extra thing. But essentially, $13.61 a month, you'll be able to run up to, say, 5 simultaneous browser tests, which I've tried this, and basically handle your like integration tests and not have to worry about all the high prices you'll see if you went to, say, a remote Selenium grid or something like that. So it's pretty effective, and getting set up is really easy because once you're in the Google Cloud platform, you can just click to get a Jenkins instance, use SSH in to set it up with SeleniumBase, and then you're off and running your tests. So that's fairly straightforward there. All right, so now that I've covered pretty much all the main features, tours, presentations, let's see. I talked about how you can use the recorder to record a Selenium-based script from a Catalan script. Master QA we covered. Let's see. Covered basic methods. Oh, the API, right. So here's some examples of other methods you might be able to find inside your Selenium-based tests, such as the basic open URL, click, and type text. There are a bunch of methods for asserting elements on a page. You can also check that there are no 404 errors or there are no JavaScript errors in the console output. So that's very effective. And this is one of the most powerful methods you have here, the self.execute script JavaScript, which basically makes it possible for Selenium-based demo mode and Selenium-based guided tours and presentations, because you can just take JavaScript and inject it into any website to do pretty much anything you want. Create a website tour, done. Any like JavaScript library can be easily injected into any website. And even if there is a restrictive content security policy, with Selenium-Based, you can override the content security policy and still inject that JavaScript into any website. So here's like another method you might see, hover and click, for like say a hover dropdown where you need to click, or a select option, or switching to an iframe, or like switch to a different window that opens, saving a screenshot. There are a lot more tests than that. If we actually go to the API, you'll probably see around a lot of methods. So if you're confused, you might be able to go here and see all the various actions you can do. And it's not all about testing, which like say all the assert methods are, but you can also say inspect the HTML for various issues. You can also use the add command to say add CSS into a website, add JavaScript, add metadata. All that just allows you to just modify a website. You can even like insert an ad blocker into a website and block all ad content there pretty easily. And I didn't really go into the details on creating tours, but the methods like that are very simple. There's 5 different tour libraries for that. And you can export a tour, play the tour as you saw before that we did on Google Maps. So it's very easy to use. Let's see. The next thing is actually, let me see if there are any questions here. If I can find the participants, there's like a chat. Let's see, I'm trying to reach the, Evan, are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Yep. Are there any, I can't find the chat window, but can you see if there are any questions so far through this presentation?
Sure. Let's see. Some compliments. Question, can you leverage pytest parameterized fixtures?
Yes. All right. I'll let you just read off the questions and I'll go through because I can't find that window. So
Sure,
there's an example test that allows you to, say, use various pytest fixtures. So for instance, if we do test SB fixture, you'll see that it's a completely different format for Selenium-Based, where instead of actually importing base case, it'll use a pytest fixture and pass that in to that, which is useful if you want to use other types of pytest fixtures that may not have full compatibility with unit test methods. So for instance, there's the pytest parametrized fixture, and you can just pass it like this, pytest.mark.parameterize that, And you'll notice that it'll function very similarly to the parameterized library that I used for other tests, but it's another way of using it or doing test parameterization, and you can use the pytest parameterized library for that. Let's see, what are the other questions that we have?
It doesn't look like there are any other questions, but yeah, I mean, feel free if there's any questions at the moment. Feel free to hop in.
All right, yeah, just to let people ask away if they have any questions, and I'll just start taking questions in. I'm also going to see if I can share from a command prompt so that I can run some tests within the terminal. Actually, I might be able to switch over to the terminal so that they can see how it runs. I'm going to switch to a terminal, 1 sec. All right, can you see the terminal screen now? I assume that's a yes. Do you see the big blue screen with all the text on it?
No, we still got your browser.
Oh, it's still the browser? Okay, let me try that. New share. Let's see if I can get that working. Terminal share. Oh, did it switch that time?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, I'm gonna start running tests. Even though you might not see the browser spin up, you'll be able to see the tests as they work through. All right, let's see. So if you go into the examples folder and do pytest, say myfirsttest.py, it's going to spin up a browser, which you probably won't see, but if you do see it, let me know, because right now it's running it and it's clicking through actions. Do you see the browser all or just the output? Okay, all right, I guess I can't do a full screen share, but essentially this was running a complex test that clicked on a bunch of things. If you want to do, say, a multi-threaded test, I could do something such as pytest test suite.py and -n4. And that's basically going to run a suite of 4 tests, but it's going to use 4 threads at once so that they're all running simultaneously. And you can't see it now, but 4 different Chrome browsers just spun up in my display, and it's running all these tests. And here you've got the output. And if I run it with --HTML equals report.html, you'll get the HTML report. So in this particular test suite, you'll see that there's 2 passing tests and 2 failing tests on purpose. And if there's an error, you'll see that the pytest output will say, hey, element, fake element dot does not exist, was not visible after 0.5 seconds. And then you'll see that stack trace there, as well as like a short test summary. Hey, this test fails on purpose with an exception, or selenium.common.exceptions.element not visible exception. So that's running test multi-threaded. There's also the Selenium-based console scripts interface, which looks like this, and there's a bunch of different commands you can see here. So if you want to say do Essbase print my first, let's see, let's print basic test.py. You run that, you'll be able to see it just printing out the test with full color formatting in the regular like console output. It's sort of like an upgrade to the Unix cat command that probably everyone here is familiar with. But instead of just doing a regular cat, it does like a syntax formatted like pretty print cat, which is quite useful to and stuff. You also have the ability to, as I said before, translate any test from one language to another. So if I do Essbase translate this text, basic test.py, into, say, Russian, and I'll print out the output. You can see that it's now importing the Russian version of SeleniumBase, and these methods are now being displayed in Russian. And I can do the same for, say, Chinese. So you can use either the abbreviation, the language abbreviation, or the actual like name of the language. Here's the same thing in Chinese. So any test can be instantly converted into any language so that like anyone who doesn't really speak the language but no CSS selectors, they'll be able to figure out, hey, this is the method and this is the CSS selector, and here's like the text I'm typing in and hitting enter with \n on. So there's a large number of tests in the examples folder, and I can't really run it now because you won't see the browser spin up as I run it, but you got an example of just what it's like to run a test or use the console scripts interface. Let's see. So we can also use a thing called the page objects tool to instantly make a test be converted to using page objects. So as you see in basic test.py, there's a page object in the input here and another one right here. So if I do Essbase, actually, let me run the script. There we go. Essbase objectify basic test.py. And it's going to create a page objects file. So if I open that, oh, you won't see that. That's right, because I'll have to, one sec, I'll have to use Essbase print page objects.py. You'll see it's created page objects, 2 of them, CSS1, which is the input there, and CSS2. So it instantly pulls out the selectors and turns them into a page object. And now if we look at the file itself, Essbase print basic test.py, you'll see that now it's using the page object. You see page.css1, and it's importing from .pageObjects import page. So instead of actually using the CSS selector that it had before, it's going to convert it into page objects. And this is especially useful if you have, say, like a lot of tests in a test suite that are reusing the same selectors. And if one changes, you don't have to go through each file to change them all. You can just change the page objects themselves. And if you want to revert your changes, you can do Essbase revert objects and then basic test.py. And if we print that out again, it should be back to the old selectors that it had before. All right, so let's see, most of this I can't really demonstrate without actually seeing the entire screen, but essentially, yeah, I've named a lot of features that you can try out for yourself. So if you want to get started, just go over to GitHub, and actually let me change the screen share to use the browser window again. One sec, let me find the Chrome. Where's that window? Like a Chrome window open. Oh, I'll just switch to Firefox. All right, there we go. So yeah, SeleniumBase.io. You'll be able, and there's the link to GitHub, and you'll be able to easily get started by either cloning SeleniumBase from GitHub or installing it via pip install. So pip install SeleniumBase. And that's pretty much the easiest way to get started. And you can also use the commands to create like a test directory such as SeleniumBase mkdir or SeleniumBase mk file, and instantly get some files that you can use for testing. But the easiest way is probably to just clone the repo from GitHub and try a bunch of the examples yourself, including tour mode and others that you've seen GIFs for, such as you saw, Selenium-Based guided tours. And if you want to see a video tutorial with all the browsers spinning up that you couldn't see here, there's a link. I'll tell you one more time that I mentioned earlier. If you go to the features section, it's the first link up there the video to YouTube, which essentially will show you how to get started, how to use the recorder tool, see various features in action, and that. So I think that concludes most of what I can talk about now without being able to do a full screen share, which it's currently not allowing, Zoom is currently not allowing me to do for some reason, but yeah.
Let me try something. I'm going to take host back again. I just want to try one more thing. It's either an enterprise issue because I previously used the enterprise.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm going to give this one more shot.
Okay.
And then we have 2 more questions.
Okay, 2 more questions. Let's see if, I think I found the, let's see. Let's see, okay, I found the questions. I see a question from Brad Brown. This is quite a powerful toolbox on top of Selenium. Looks like Selenium-Based has been around quite a while. Can you tell us a bit about what made you start the project? Okay. All right, well, basically, Selenium-Based, before it was open sourced, it used to be like the early version of it was a test framework within a company called HubSpot that you might have heard of. It's in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Essentially, they do marketing software. Essentially, I was tasked to build out a test framework for them that was used for all their web automation. And toward around 2014, because they were open sourcing a lot of projects they had around then, I got permission to open source Selenium-Based, and once I did that, I expanded on it greatly. And back at the time, in 2014, when it was first open sourced, it was still using nose tests instead of pytest, and it was using like Python 2.7, and all the JavaScript features that you saw here weren't around yet. Those all came much later as I got good at JavaScript. But it was originally, yeah, testing enterprise software, and then I expanded it with a lot of other features. Let's see. Let's see. Next question. Here we go. From Jerry Cavan to everyone. When I used pytest on a project after installing Selenium-Based for a different project, pytest was broken. The Selenium-Based installation modify anything in Python pytest that could cause this? Okay. If you're installing Selenium-Based, so there's a lot of different dependencies that it has, and if you're not installing inside a virtual environment, which is recommended, a version, the Python dependency that you might have installed might not be the one that you wanted. So for instance, if we go to Selenium-Based and we go into the requirements file, which is quite deep, you'll see that there's 52 lines of requirements that a lot of them have very specific versions of. So if you're not installing in a virtual environment and you have a project that uses Python that has something pinned to a different Python dependency, you might want to switch to the virtual environment so that when all these are installed, it won't modify any Python dependencies of other projects that are in the global virtual environment or the global environment that you're using. Let's see. So yeah, use a virtual environment when using Selenium-Based, and if you're not sure how, there's actually a link to that. Here we go. It's right at the top in getting started. Python virtual env is recommended, and it gives you to the link to the regular installation, but there's a shortcut. So if you just want to get a virtual environment going, I assume most Python developers have already been familiar with this. You can install something such as virtual env wrapper for Windows, or on Mac, just virtual env and virtual env wrapper. And then you can use a command such as mk virtual env event. But Nowadays, I think most people are using mbend. So you can do Python 3-mbend selenium-based vend, and then you can use source selenium-based _vend/bin/activate to activate your virtual environment. And you probably want to do that before installing dependencies if you're using other. Let's see if we have any more questions. For those not used to virtual environments, let's see if I can copy that from a link. Perhaps another something to assist people with virtual environments. Easy install pip. Locking down your current requirements. Okay, so yeah, pipenv is another tool. But yeah, there are several different ways of handling virtual environments. So just grab the tutorial that you find most useful and use that to create your virtual environments. All right, let's go on to the next Zoom question. Let's see, we've covered pytest parameterized fixtures, yes. Infers the language, yes, so you can do the language detection so that when you do a Selenium-based translate feature, it's basically using, it's looking at the import. So if you're using from Selenium-based import base case, it knows you're using the regular English version of Selenium-based. If it's saying from, if it says from Selenium-based.translate.Chinese import the Chinese like test case, then it knows you're in Chinese, and then when it does the one-to-one mapping to convert the methods over, it knows which methods to use. It's a pretty powerful feature. Let's see. Question from, let's see, do I have any way of seeing all the participants that are still here? Yeah, if there are any questions, just put them in the Zoom group chat because I'm going through that right now. Let's see. Oh, from Jerry Cavan to everyone, I installed Selenium-Based and was writing tests for our website within 5 minutes. It was very easy. This was the best install I've ever experienced. Great. Awesome, Jerry. That's great to hear. Let's see. I'm zooming around probably out of order. Let's see. Any more questions? It works in, yeah, Chrome, Firefox, Safari, IE. I even tested it on Microsoft Edge, although there's currently an issue with Edge because they just made a sort of a breaking change. That's listed in the Selenium-based features on Microsoft Edge. Chromium no longer accepts Chrome options on Windows. So I don't know if you can see the screen, but you can no longer, I'm trying to get, oh, the Zoom controls are blocking. Oh, there we go. Let's see. Yeah, so Chromium, Microsoft Edge now uses Chromium for its automation framework. I mean, for its web browser backend. So it's sort of like a joining between, it's nothing like the old Edge. It's now like a Chromium Edge, and they're currently making a lot of changes. So right now, you'd probably better off just be using regular Chrome instead of Chromium until they've finished making their updates. And I'm still probably making updates to the Universal Translator API, which allows you to translate tests from one language to another. And I've created several basically commits to the repository in order to handle this. And there's probably a few more methods I still need to translate, such as the ones I added to today for the Selenium-based presentations. All right, let's go back to Zoom. Let's see. Does the SB fixture get provided for free, or is there a definition we need to set up? That was a question from Brad Brown. So it's once you install Selenium-Based, it's automatically there because it's part of the pytest plugin. So once you have that set, it's going to immediately, that Selenium-Based fixture mode is available. And if you go to the examples, you'll see that there's really two different ways of using Selenium-Based. One is the default way where it does from Selenium-Based import base case. And you can just see that from my first test.py. From Selenium-Based import base case, and then you inherit base case, and then it sort of combines pytest with unit test. But you can also use Selenium-Based as a fixture. So if you use, let's see, test SB fixture, you don't have to import anything at all because it's like a magical pytest thing where you just pass SB as the argument to your test. It automatically brings in Selenium-Based and all the methods in so that you don't have to do a regular import. So 2 different ways of using Selenium-Based, and if you really need like heavy usage of pytest fixtures, using Selenium-Based as a fixture will be a better idea for compatibility because unit test and pytest have some incompatibilities, or at least with pytest fixtures and unit test. If you're just using a straight up pytest, you'll be able to use the default mode with Selenium-Based import base case quite easily. All right, do we have any more questions? Let's see, from Perry, thank you so much for the presentation. Selenium-Based looks awesome. From Rachel M, thank you so much for speaking today. Great. Let's see. I think I covered everything. I'm just going back to make sure I got everybody's questions. But it looks like, yeah, Evan, do you have anything I might have missed today?
I think the thing that was interesting that we discussed yesterday was the ability to make page objects, just like turn a test into page objects. I'm not sure if you read that.
Yep, I covered that briefly. I don't know if you stepped out for a minute, but essentially, on the command line, I did the Selenium-Based. Actually, let me switch back to the command line and do that again.
Cool.
Let's see, I'll just cover that because that's pretty useful. All right, can you see my terminal?
Yep.
All right, cool. So the Selenium-Based page objects. Let's see. So let's see, if we want to convert a test to use the page object model, we can just do Essbase extract objects, and then grab a test like basic test.py. And it's going to create the page objects file, or actually, since it was already created, it updated that. And as you saw before, if you Essbase print that, since I can't open anything into a new window, you won't see it. Pageobjects.py. That's what the it looks like, because you can see the page objects or the CSS selectors were pulled into page objects, which you can then rename these. And then you can inject, you can do Essbase inject objects after you've like renamed the variables into, say, a test that you want, basic test.py. So now if you go into Essbase print basic test.py, you'll see it's now using the the page objects, page.css1 in the type method or page.css2 in the click method. And this allows you to have multiple tests that reuse the same selector. And if one changes somewhere, you can just change it in the page objects file so that you don't have to change it in every single test that uses the selector. And if you want to revert your changes, you can just do Essbase revert objects, or not really revert, it'll basically do the reverse, and it'll take the page objects from the page objects file and spit out the CSS selectors back into the file, basic test.py. And if I do Essbase print basic test.py, you now see that the CSS selectors have returned into there, so that you now, if you need to like go back to the original, you can do that. So basically take what it has in the page objects file and put those into where those variables were used. And this is quite useful if you have like, say, a lot of tests that reuse selectors and you make changes to the website, and you don't want to have to like change every single occurrence of that selector. You just change it in one place and all that will propagate through. And some other useful features, such as the Essbase MK file like test z.py, it's going to create a basic boilerplate for the test. So if I do now Essbase print test z.py, it'll just create a basic boilerplate test that has like your from Selenium-Based import base case. You have the class that uses base case. You have a test defined and like the top 5 methods that you'll be using, such as opening a page, inserting an element, inserting text, typing something into a field, and clicking. So that instead of having to copy paste every new test, you can just use the Essbase mk file command, and you can automatically just create a new file without having to like copy from an existing test if you want to start from scratch. However, there is another version of this where you can just do, let's see if I just test z2.py -b. Oh, let me invalid run command. Let me check. Oh, it's use line numbers. Oh, wrong command. Essbase mk file test z2-b. There we go. So now if I do Essbase print test z2.py, this is another way of creating a basic boilerplate. It just literally creates a basic from Selenium-Based import base case, the class, the method definition, and just like one command, self.open about.blank. So this is pretty much like breaking Selenium-Based down to the most basic test that does absolutely nothing except for spinning up a browser once it starts and spinning the browser back down once the test ends, unless you're using the feature where you can reuse the browser session with --reuse-session, and then the same browser window will remain open until all tests complete for all your tests. So that's just a quick way of just creating a file and then running that. And if I just run that pytest test z2.py, I run that, it'll just, you won't see the browser, but it will spin that up and spin it back down. And if I run it in headless mode, it'll be even faster. Then I won't even see what it's doing. I'll run it, and it's done in 3.2 seconds. And I think if I run again, there might be some pytest caching going on. So if I run it the same test again, or with hitting the same thing, it will do it even faster. So now you say I reran the same test in headless mode, and now I can get it down to like 2 seconds, which is, I guess, some sort of caching ability of pytest. So that is pretty quick, and that's running in headless mode, which won't spin up the browser as you run the tests. Let me see if there are any more questions on
Very cool.
Yeah. Let's see. Essbase print functionality by itself is pretty nifty. Yeah. So Essbase print is essentially just a way of getting an improvement on the Unix cat command, where I can print out code and actually see what the code looks like in like a command prompt without having to open the file. It's like, yeah, a cat upgrade, but you can use it anywhere. You don't even need to use Selenium-Based with it. You just install Selenium-Based, and now you can do Essbase print a file, and it'll automatically detect the language and then print that out, which I guess some people are just using that as itself. So which is pretty useful. Like bat, which is a cat replacement. Oh, I don't know. I guess there might be another command that does it, but yeah, it's the Selenium-Based version where it just detects the file and prints that out. Let's see. Is there another feature you'd like me to cover now, Evan?
Not necessarily a feature, but I'm interested in there's a couple of people here that I've met in the past that had previously used pytest or currently use pytest. Now, if they have an existing test suite in their organization, if they want to do like a migration and just use Selenium-Based, do you have any suggestions for that? Or do you have any pro tips or anything?
Yeah, so it's actually fairly easy to migrate over from one framework to Selenium-Based. So for instance, let me let's, oh, actually you can't see out my other windows, but if I just, we talk about basic test.py, so Essbase print basic test.py, you'll see the commands are fairly simple, such as open, type, click, go back, things like that. It's really easy to say go from a different framework over to Selenium-Based, because Selenium-Based simplifies down things so much down to just like a single import, a single like class, make your test definition method, and just basic method calls. And there's some duplicate method names so that if you're coming over from a different framework that uses, say, like visit instead of open, you can use that as well. So if I just actually Essbase print my first test.py, and you see the, here we go, in the notes useful info. So some test frameworks have like go to, some test frameworks have visit as like the command to open a URL. You can like just interchange it. Even if you don't remember all the methods, the method that you're using before might still work. Let's see, type, update, text, input, just various ways of typing text. There's the, is just the same thing as adding text. The main difference between like these three methods here and send keys is that type, update, text, and input, it will clear out the text field if there's already text in there, whereas send keys and add text won't. So if there's already text in a text field that you're typing into, it will add onto that text and not remove it. So there's a slight difference there, because sometimes you want to like add onto the text field, or if there's like an autocomplete going on that you don't want, you'll then use one of these methods here to clear out the text field first and type text into the field. Find element, wait for element visible, wait for element, those are pretty much the same. Assert element visible, that's the same. Assert text or assert text visible, that's the same. Find text, wait for text, that's the same. Click link text is the same as like click with link equals text or click link text. Let's see. Oh, self.get URL is special. So if URL is a valid URL, it's going to work just like self.open and open the page. But if URL is a selector, then it's instead going to call self.getElement and use URL as a selector. And this is like quite interesting because it allows you to basically, so the raw WebDriver thing uses get to open URLs, but like another test framework like Cypress uses get to get the CSS selector. So now it works both ways. It just auto detects that. Similarly with how Selenium-Based auto detects whether or not your element is XPath. Like if it's an XPath selector, it'll know right away and it will use that instead. So it's very convenient, and that's why you no longer have to specify, oh, this is XPath selector, or this is just a regular CSS selector. It's going to use auto detection. All right, let's see. So there's a method self.getAttribute. I didn't really talk much about that before, but I could get, say, any attribute, the value of any attribute of an element, and that's the same as element equals self.findElement, and then like say title equals element.getAttribute title. Selenium-Based like simplifies a lot of things that would normally take like 2 or 3 lines of code to do, and just do it in one single line, which makes the tests much more simplified and fewer lines of code. So that is extremely useful. And there's a method that's called assert exact text, which is similar to assert text, but with assert text, it's going to use in, like assert that this text is anywhere within this entire text. But with assert exact text, all it will do is ignore leading and trailing white space and make sure that like that text is completely the text that's there. And if that assertion fails, then the test fails. And there's like some minor simplifications, like if the URL starts with :// then it'll automatically use https:// which is really only useful if you want to like reduce the line length by 5 characters. The full method list is in the help docs method summary, but base case, which is located in Selenium-Based fixtures base case, has all the method definitions. So if you want to get the details, you can go into there and find it. All right. Are there any more questions before basically let me just switch the share back to the browser window. All right, let's see, let's see. I'm now sharing that. So yeah, if you have any questions about Selenium-Based, there is a ton of documentation on the Selenium-Based GitHub page. And there's also a specific doc site which pretty much mirrors the Selenium-Based GitHub page, which is seleniumbase.io, which is sort of like the same as the GitHub docs, but you can like query it more easily with like a search bar that auto like lets you find things more easily if you're looking for something specific. Really easy to get set up. Command line options, lots of features, lots of examples, reports, instantly run a test in mobile, lots of continuous integration options, lots of methods, tour mode, multi-languages, presenter for creating presentations, the recorder, visual tests, master QA, and lots of other methods and more. So definitely give it a try. And if you have any questions, definitely feel free to join the Gitter chat, which I guess one way people come to try to reach me to ask questions. And I try to respond as quickly as possible. And there's also, if you find a bug, well, you can open up an issue. And I've closed like a bunch, so I'm very quick on closing issues as soon as I can. Let's see. Any more questions?